For our non-customers that are joining today's webinar, just to orient, bridges are the Starbridge lingo for lead lists. And so there are several different kinds of lead lists that we can build in the product, running, of course, from your RFPs, competitor purchase order information, pulling and scraping contact data, analyzing job changes at specific entities. But where we're going to spend our time specifically today is reviewing meeting minutes and strategic plans. So I'll click into this bridge, and this is the sneak peek that Jenn was referencing, our new search refractor. And this is really intended to make the lead list or bridge building experience as intuitive as possible. So we'll use an imagined scenario or like a mock scenario of a team that works with K-12 institutions and provides staffing solutions. If we want to think about what we'd be scanning for in these meeting minutes or in these strategic plans, we can simply use natural language to indicate some of the topics that we'd be interested in seeing surfaced. So for example, we can think about high teacher turnover and staffing challenges, the need to fill special educator roles. We can go as high level as a phrase like this. We will click enter, and Starbridge will analyze our search criteria. So we will auto set buyer filters. Buyers are loosely interpreted as different kinds of accounts, and we've auto set schools and school districts. I'm only interested in looking at what's happening at the school district level for the purposes of today's webinar. Our location is auto set to the wider US, but we can also filter into specific states depending on what our sales territory looks like or where we're interested in parsing this information. And then we can also set certain filters, if helpful, around minimum enrollment, budget, or the current number of teachers within a certain school district. From there, we can set filters on the kind of document we want to scan. So here I'm looking at both board meetings and strategic plans. And we can also set filters around the time frame that we want to gather information for. Our default is the last 6 months, but we can get really precise and just look at anything that was posted in the last 30 days, the last 3 months, last year, or the last 2 years. And you'll see that based on that natural language query that I initially input, staffing turnover, the need to fill special educator roles, we've auto-generated phrases that are going to be valuable for this sales team when they're parsing meeting minutes. So I've got raised concerns about high teacher turnover, for example, discussed staffing challenges in schools, identified issues with special educator vacancies. We have the ability to click into any of these phrases and make edits as we see fit. We can also remove phrases that may not be relevant. So for example, plan to review recruitment and onboarding. Maybe that's not as relevant for our process. And we can, of course, add our own search phrases. So maybe we want to think about working with a staffing provider. We can also prompt Starbridge to add similar search phrases and keywords to broaden the scope of what we're looking for. So if we click into add similar search phrases and keywords, we see that we've added now even more potential high-value themes that were discussed at the board meeting level or in strategic plans. And a note about how we search. Because we are an AI-native organization, AI will understand the context around what's being discussed at these board meetings and within these strategic plans. So we're not just keyword matching anytime, for example, staffing agency is listed in a board meeting transcript or in a strategic plan. We're actually looking at the context behind that mention to only serve truly relevant results. And when we're thinking about relevance, this is where we can set match thresholds and scoring criteria. So the match threshold is going to measure both against the search phrases that we've listed here and against the organization itself, because Starbridge bases its search criteria around the actual profile of the organization as it's built out in your Starbridge environment. So, for example, if you specialize in special educator staffing and the meeting was more generally around staffing, that will likely score a 3. If they're discussing, for example, wider staffing budget deficits, that would score lower on the threshold. We can also define score criteria to help the system learn what a strong match would look like versus a not so great match. So we've again auto-generated some strong matching criteria, board or leadership discussion that connects teacher turnover and staffing shortages to concrete instructional disruption. For example, difficulty covering classes, inconsistent student support, overloaded remaining staff, or missed instructional time, and frames it as an urgent problem needing a coordinated response. Of course, your solution is unique. The services that you offer are unique. So if there's anything else that you can think of that would make a strong match score criteria, we can add it in here. By that same token, we can penalize or score lower certain meetings that would indicate that we are potentially too late to the party. So, for example, we can say discussion of an upcoming renewal with an existing staffing provider. Actually, that would probably be a good one, but maybe they're saying we're super happy, or we have no problems with turnover, or we have no budget this year to invest in staffing. That should rank lower on our match threshold. We'll click Preview Signals here, and Starbridge will automatically parse through the database of signals that we keep live and active to show a couple of example signals of returned results. And then from there, we'll be prompted to create our bridge. So I'll pause for questions while we're scanning through some of these signals. And because I can't see you while I'm sharing my screen, Jen, let me know if any questions have come up.
Yeah, one right here. How do you handle buyer lists if they're already in a CRM? Let's say like all of my reps have different territories, and then I think secondary here, does Starbridge integrate with CRMs?
What a great question. We integrate natively with both Salesforce and HubSpot. So if you have a list of accounts that already lives in Salesforce or HubSpot, or accounts that are matched to territories, we will natively sync, and then you don't need to build specific buyer lists within Starbridge. We will also match territories to your reps' accounts in Starbridge. So if, for example, Jen is a rep and she only works on the West Coast, that will be the filter that is parsed when we're thinking about the buyer list based on what you've set up in your CRM.
That was perfect. I think we're maybe getting a little bit ahead of ourselves here with the second question, but Simone, how do you see people using this type of insight in outbound? And like, is there a way to create a custom token in Starbridge where you can actually leverage some of these quotes and initiatives?
1000%. I think that's the perfect segue into showing what's happened when this is built. So I'll make sure to touch on this in just a second. The only other thing I wanted to say about CRM syncing is that part of the value of Starbridge is both account cleanup. So if there's duplicates that are showing up in your CRM, we can help with that based on what we're returning. And then also total addressable market enrichment. So there are potentially school districts or certain accounts that may not live in your CRM that are indicating that they're in market based on what we are parsing in our database. So another kind of value proponent that a lot of folks see when they begin working with Starbridge is actually adding accounts that they might not already be working into their CRM. So here we've got our example signals as they're coming up. Here we can also kind of see which are going to be above our threshold, so which are scoring highly, which are below our threshold. So like a couple of examples that are not looking so good. So for example, the hazard mitigation plan is definitely not something that we want to review, but this gives us a sneak peek of not only how closely we're matching and aligning to our search criteria, but also to our match threshold. And then we'll go ahead, create bridge. We'll be prompted to name our bridge. So in this case, I'll say webinar staffing, and I'll create it. Now, this bridge has already been created thanks to the magic of building in advance. It's almost like us on a cookie now, where we take the pie out of the oven. And so we are in our consumer view, and based on that search query, we'll take you through all of the signals that have been returned, and we can sort by when they were posted. I like to sort, obviously, from newest to oldest. And then we can also sort by our match score. So here I'll sort by match score, largest to smallest. And so now we have the quick, actionable signal that our reps can then engage with if you wanted to see, like we're clicking into for the relevant ICP contact at this district. And I'll show you how to do that in just a second. We'll just give it a second to prepare the outbound email.
One quick question here, Simone. How does Starbridge verify contact data?
Oh, such a great question. So for those of you that are familiar with buying lead lists from our agiles or parsing through our Zoom infos, those legacy providers, they all have a different way of assigning and matching contact data. But historically, the standard has always been, let's look at LinkedIn, let's look at the social networking site. And we know that that math doesn't really match the reality of contacts that work in the public sector. They are not updating their LinkedIn as often. There's a lot of turnover in certain segments of the public sector. And so the way that we validate is actually running a custom web agent to both look at the actual staff directory on the school district website, parse through any recent press releases or any job changes that would have been brought up in a board meeting or in a strategic plan or in a press release, to then assign the contact with the accurate email address and their phone number, which we bounce check on a monthly basis. So we're not only validating, does Jenn work at Starbridge? We're confirming that the email address that we're associating with Jenn is in fact a valid email address and isn't going to bounce if you were going to send her this email. And for example, this is the email that was auto-drafted. We've got the email address returned here.
I think so. Would you mind? You're totally good. Would you mind resharing your window? I think right now you're on the, there we go. Yep, you're good.
Have we not been seeing this window the whole time?
No, it was literally just like, I think you clicked out and we went back to the main page for a second.
Okay, but we were back on this like details window?
Yes, you're totally good.
Phew. Okay, what did we miss? Did we see the email body generate?
I think we did, but I think we might have missed. I don't know if we missed anything. Christy is, we're getting affirmation from the audience too that we're good here.
Okay, thank goodness. I wonder, that's funky. All right. Well, we had an email that was drafted, and then we talked through finding contact data. And would it be helpful if I go through how we match contact data one more time?
Yeah, I think that'd be awesome.
Sure. So the way that we do that is by validating from the most valid source. So instead of checking on LinkedIn first, because a lot of these folks are not updating their LinkedIn. We're actually looking at the direct district website. We're parsing the staff directory because we retain a database of board minutes and strategic plans. We're able to cross-reference against that official documentation. And then we are able to then waterfall and match the contact based on the most used email domain and based on what we are able to confirm is viable and active. So we bounce check and validate email domains and phone numbers on a monthly basis. So not only are we confirming that Jenn works at Starbridge, we're confirming that her email is jen@starbridge.ai, so you are not working off a non-updated lead list.
So critical when you're sending hundreds of these emails too. The worst is when it bounces back.
Precisely. And so I can show you, if we're going into our table view, what it would look like to actually run adding a contact. And so we would simply do this in build, add enrichment, enrich contact, get contact. And this is where we can list in priority order the titles that we're interested in returning. Because we are running this on a meetings bridge, we're going to return one contact. However, we can run a contact-specific bridge for the highest response buyers, so the best school districts that are scoring, let's say, 4 and above, and we can run multiple different contact titles and return email addresses, titles, phone numbers for each of those different contact titles at these school districts. We'll go back into consumer view just to kind of highlight the responses that we're aggregating here. Here to answer questions. What else might be relevant?
I think we have one final question here, Simone.
Perfect.
Curious, what would you say are best practices when using these insights in an outbound email? Are there tips and tricks that you've picked up from speaking to other accounts about this?
Totally. And I think it kind of depends on the nature of the play that you're running. So I have some teams that are in their Q4 right now that are really focused on trying to build like short and medium term pipeline. So they're working less towards like these longer term, more strategic deals. And I would say that the email response to that kind of trigger tends to be a little bit more specific to what just happened at a board meeting. And it's interesting, we can define how we want this email to be written. If we're writing create personalized outreach, we would say create personalized outbound email, and we can simply in natural language describe the kind of email that we want it to generate. And so if we were running a short-term play, maybe we'd say something like, craft me an outbound email directly addressing the staffing concerns that were brought up at this board meeting. However, I also work with teams that want to take more of a high-level approach that doesn't directly reference what was brought up in this board meeting. And so in that case, we might want to take a softer, more gentler touch to not focus so much on what happened at this board meeting, but focus more broadly on the kinds of challenges that our solution would resolve for a school district. So in that case, we might prompt it to write an email that's a little bit softer that says, we work with XYZ school district in the related state or area. We've helped them reduce turnover by this percentage. Would be keen to have a conversation if this is something that's relevant to you. So you're not directly acknowledging what happened in the board meeting. You're taking a softer touch. The idea is, though, you know that this email is going to be more relevant to this district because you know that it was discussed. You're just not calling out that it was discussed. So I'd say that there's two different kinds of ways to approach going outbound based on the information that you're returning. And then it's up to you when you're sending an email, or of course when you're calling and following up, how specific you want to get around the signal.
I love that. Well, I know we've already gone through a good number of questions here. For the folks on the call today, if you have any final questions, please go ahead and enter them in the Q&A box. And Simone, this was an awesome, awesome demo. Really appreciate you taking the time to join us today for this.
Oh, I'm so sorry that we had that little glitch around what I was sharing, but I'm glad that we were able to get back to it.
Totally. The joys of webinar software.
The joys of webinar software.
Well,
let me know if there's any additional questions while we still have our time together.
100%. I think looks like we're probably all good here. For the folks on the call, really appreciate all of you taking the time today to join us. Hopefully you're coming away with some intel and expertise on leveraging meeting minutes for your own outbound. And if you have any questions at all, you can contact us at either Jenn@starbridge.ai or Simone@starbridge.ai, and we'll be getting you information as well as the recording to this after the call today as well. Thank you so much for joining us.
Awesome. Talk to you later.
Bye, you all.
Bye.